Anin, Marshall ni Winzowin, Asini ni Winzowin, Mikanako te intunji, Oma Mikanakwa chu Anishinaabe shkuniganing, Maingando dem, Oma Mikanakwa ju, Mama wiga bege kitaso, wigamigung hindanoki. Ingikno mage, Anishinaabe mon, Anishinaabe chegentago, Gete, Anishinaabe Twawin. My name is Marshall. Some people call me Asini. And I come from the Turtle Mountain. I come from a place called Mikanako. That's the heart of the turtle. And I work here at the college. I work on language and culture preservation, I'll say. But I also teach. I teach language, I teach culture, I teach our traditions, history. I was asked to give a presentation today. Aanikobijigan. That's one of our words in Anishinaabe. And that's talking about a connection. So when you say Aanikobijigan, you're talking about things that are tied together. This is part of Anishinaabe worldview. So for Anishinaabe, we're tied to our ancestors, but we're also tied to our future generations. That's kind of what this word is talking about. So Aanikobijigan, that could be your great grandparent or your great grandchild. And you and those generations are all tied to one another. When I say in Aanikobijigan, I could be talking about my ancestors, or I could be talking about the generations that come after me. And for Anishinaabe, whenever we make our choices in life, everything we do in life, we're supposed to remember the ones who came before us, and we're always supposed to think about the ones that are going to come after us. So everything we do in life, we're supposed to remember that. We're supposed to remember our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. What are we doing right now to make sure they have a better life? And a long time ago, that's what our leaders did. Leaders like Chief Littleshell III, Chief Broken Mouth. They call him Oshkino Ass, young man. But he got a name Broken Mouth later on in life. But during their lifetime, they were free. They were on buffalo hunts, and they had freedom in ways we can't imagine today. In their same lifetime, they lived through pandemics and starvations, and they saw thousands of their people die. And at the end of their life, they were confined to reservation boundaries. But no matter what happened, they never stopped thinking about us. Because without the choices they made in their life, we wouldn't be here today. Our reservation wouldn't be here today. Our grandchildren wouldn't have a place to be today. So Aanikobijigan, that kind of embodies a lot of teachings and a lot of knowledge in a worldview that a lot of people lost now. So starvation and pandemics. So when we say Aanikobijigan, we got to remember our past, and we got to think about our future. Sometimes our past is a hard thing to deal with, to talk about, to unravel and really dig deep into what happened to our ancestors, to our people. But so in 1849, Father Belcourt, he documented a pandemic amongst the Plains Ojibwa villages. And during that pandemic, he said 9 out of 10 did not survive. He said when they would plow the grounds where our villages were, there'd just be bones everywhere. So these pandemics, this wasn't the only pandemic, but it was a documented one. There were numerous pandemics like this one after. And starvation, they kill all the buffalo, and we start to starve. In this winter of 1887, 88, 151 people starved to death. But that wasn't the first starvation, and that wasn't the last. That's just a documented starvation. The oral history talks about multiple starvations. They'd get hungry and they'd start eating their moccasins. They'd cut them up into pieces and they make a soup. Or they'd take their moccasins and put them over the fire till they're crispy and they start eating them. Or they would cut pieces off their teepees and they'd eat their teepees. Or they would eat their horses and their dogs. And they'd even scoop the blood off the snow and they'd eat that too. So it was hard. Sometimes we don't remember these things because our history is not shared as much as it used to be. But these things happened, and there was Francis Cree. So Francis Cree, when he was a chairman, there were babies dying. And he wanted to find out why. So he had a protest. And they brought a drum out in front of the IHS. And he protested there till he got meetings with the governor, the Senate, the Indian agents, and he demanded autopsies to be done. And he recalled that the autopsies show that these children were starving to death here. Now, there's the audio here.
Stories can start to that. Start to that. Dr. Monroe checked it out. So this kid was start to that. It was no hospital.
So our oral history tells a little more. On paper, we had a starvation during that time, but the starvation didn't end there. Even in the 1960s, we still had people here dying of starvation. And oppression. So, oppression is something that happens from the outside, and it comes to you, to your people, to your community. And there were numerous forms of oppression. They started with the boarding schools. But then they had laws that outlawed our whole way of life, our ceremonies, our language. Every aspect of our way of life was banned. Our lodges. When people are oppressed like that, something else happens. We'll go to the next slide. Oh, I got the clicker. Never mind. Forgot I had this. So punishment for culture. So for those who didn't go to boarding school, the adults or the ones in the community, they still got punished for culture and language. There was still a very strong focus at eliminating those things. So different documents tell you different punishments, but generally they'd be put in jail, the BIA jail, and they'd be starved until they denounced their culture. Some documents say 10 days, some say 30 days, so they'd be put in a jail and they'd starve them till they said, okay, I'm not going to do that no more. I'm going to stop speaking my language, stop building my ceremonies. But if they kept doing that, they kept getting caught, and sometimes they'd send them to an insane asylum. So they had insane asylums for Indians who believed in their culture. Sometimes they'd be sent to prison for 6 months. So in this short period of time, we went from this free people. We lost our land, we lost our freedom, lost our children to boarding school. We start losing our identity. And this oppression happens all over the world. But there's a result of oppression. Something happens in a community. It just don't go away. So usually oppression, people who are oppressed, they tend to adopt the characteristics of their oppressor. And they start oppressing themselves. And they usually call that lateral oppression. Sometimes it's lateral colonialism, internalized colonialism. There's different names, lateral violence. But on Indian reservations, this is a pretty prominent thing that happens, even today. But historically, there was so in Belcourt, the agencies, the government, and the churches, they put a lot of pressure on being an Anishinaabe or being a traditional person. So if you got caught with a sweat lodge or a sacred object, or you got caught doing something like that, you'd usually be in trouble. And in the Belcourt area, they had the hospital. So if you showed up to IHS hospital and you had Sundance piercings, they send you to prison. So you couldn't go there. The schools, the BIA superintendent, the agency, you had the BIA police, you had the church, so you had all these entities with one common goal to eliminate our identity as the Anishinaabe people, or as Native people in general on all reservations. But again, lateral oppression, you internalize that, and you adopt the characteristics of your oppressor. So eventually, over time, another oppressor emerges, and that oppressor is our own people. So now it's our own people who don't want us to speak our language. It's our own people who don't want us to have a drum, have a Sundance, have our language, have our ceremonies. So something happens. So there's a lot of pressure in that area where all these entities exist. In Turtle Mountain, that place happened to be Belcourt. So over time, the ceremonies kind of move further and further and further away. And a lot of our ceremonies and our languages, they survived in a place called, well, some people call it Kadashi, Anishinaabe, Kak. And that's a reference to this history that I'm talking about. That means the place where the Anishinaabe are, the place where the language is, the place where the ceremonies are at. So when we say that word, Kadashi, Anishinaabe, Kak, that was that acknowledgement that that's where they went, that's where our ceremonies went. And that's where they survived for a lot of them. Here's a picture of the old reservation. So our original reservation was 20 townships, but it got reduced to 2 townships, to what it is now. So that's kind of what that picture is. So Anishinaabe worldview. It's a complex thing to try and understand a worldview, to try and understand what this means, what those words mean. Anishinaabe worldview. You could talk about it and you could read about it. You could watch videos on it. But knowing something in theory isn't the same thing as knowing it from practice, from being that, from having that as part of your life. But I'm going to share a story. Hopefully we could bridge some gaps. So this is Nanapush. Some call him Nanabuju, some call him Wenabuju. But he was a spirit, and when he was born, they said he looked kind of like this, kind of like that middle picture. So they named him after Wabuzu, that rabbit. But his name changes over time, different locations. But when I heard these stories, they call him Nanapush. That's usually what I call him. But there's stories that we had in Turtle Mountain that survived. And here's one of the old leaders, Ogimakap, they called him. And he lived north of Dunseith on Standing Chief Hill. And that's across the road from what's now the Dunseith Day School. But Ogimagabo, that was his name, Standing Chief. And he spoke our languages. He knew our old stories. He built the old lodges, sang songs. But we still sing those songs today. We still sing his songs. We still build his lodges. We still tell his stories. Some of us still speak the language he spoke. So despite all the best efforts, some of our old ways survived through some of these old people, like Standing Chief. But Standing Chief had a story about Turtle Mountain, Mikanakwachu. A long time ago, there were these beings, Mishipishu Wak. They call them the water panthers. And they didn't really like Nanapush. They were kind of envious of him. They had these negative feelings toward Nanapush, so they wanted to kill him. So they tried to drown him, and they flooded the earth. But Nanapush survived. There's a big story about how he survived, but I'm kind of going to summarize it so I don't run out of time. But Nanapush survives anyway, and he hears people calling for him. He hears people calling from somewhere. Nanapush, he's looking around, and he kind of figures out where it's coming from, and he starts going in that direction. And he comes up on all these animals, all these birds, all these beings. They're suffering. Some of these birds are flying and they're getting tired. But then they got to land in the water and they start drowning. The bear and the otter, all these swimmers are suffering too. They're drowning as well because of this flood. So Nanapush, he knew he had to do something. So they said he called this turtle from the east. He whistled. I don't know how he whistled. something like that, I'm guessing. This turtle came, and it came from the east, and its tail was in the east, and its head was in the west. And all life jumped on that turtle's back, and that turtle kind of started to bob. He kind of had a lot of weight on his back. So Nanapush knew that wasn't a solution. He had to figure something else out. So he jumped in the water, and he dove, and all the animals are kind of happy, like, hey, Nanapush is here, trying to help. But Nanapush comes back, and he failed at what he was trying to do. He was trying to get some dirt from the bottom, but he couldn't do that. So he asked these animals if they would try. They said, okay, Nanapush, we'll give it a shot. So one by one, they start diving into the water. The bear, the otter, the eagle, all these animals. And one by one, they fail. And it's starting to get kind of hopeless. Then they hear a little squeaky voice. They're kind of looking around. And this little Wajashkun's little muskrat comes. He said, I'll try it out. They kind of started laughing at him. They kind of started making fun of him. They don't really believe in that muskrat too much. But he didn't care, that little muskrat. He dove in the water. And they're still kind of laughing at him, but he's still diving down. Now they're starting to get worried. They're starting to panic. But that little muskrat's still going. They start crying. They think the muskrat's gone forever. Then they look in the water and they see that little muskrat float up. He drowned. So Nanapush scooped him out of the water. And Nanapush has gifts. And one of his gifts, they call it the breath of life. So he blew on that little muskrat. Oh. And the little muskrat started to wiggle a little bit. And he opened his little hand up to Nanapush. Nanapush grabbed a little piece of dirt between his fingers. And he went to the middle of that turtle's back and he placed it there. And he started breathing on it, that breath of life. Oh. And that little piece of dirt got a little bit bigger. So Nanapush was like, hey, this is kind of working out for me. So he kept doing that over and over and over again. And pretty soon he's on this mound of dirt. And he's kind of looking around and he keeps blowing on that dirt over and over again. Whoa. And pretty soon that whole turtle's back is covered with dirt. And he keeps going for weeks and weeks. And pretty soon there's hills all over that turtle's back. Everywhere you look, there's all these hills everywhere. But he kept blowing on that dirt, and land kept spreading in the four directions. And for months and months, he blew on that dirt, and he made valleys, rivers, lakes, streams, hills, mountains. And sooner or later, he said, okay, that should be enough for everybody to survive on. And they call that Mikanak Mini Sing, that's Turtle Island. And in the middle of Turtle Island, in the middle of the four directions, there's the remains of that turtle that gave her life to us. And the remains of that turtle, they call that a turtle mountain. Mikanakwachu. So Turtle Mountain is not the hills, it's the turtle that gave her life. In the heart of the turtle, they call that Mikanakote. And the turtle had a head somewhere in the west. Mikanakojigan. Then there's a stream that goes through the belly. That's where we're at right now. CP Sing. And there was the area by the tail. Ozo Tongue. Then later on, they took our names from us and gave us names like Balkward and Dunseith. But a long time ago, we had that relationship with the land, with our language, with our stories. All these things kind of matter for a worldview. How you feel about yourself. How you feel about where you come from. How you feel about the language you speak. So all these things we lost, they're important pieces of us. And when we lose them, something happens to us. We'll talk about that later on. But ceremony and belonging. So Anishinaabe, when we're born, a long time ago we had a purpose. We had a clan. We had brothers and sisters, we had aunties and uncles and nieces and nephews, and no matter where we went, in Anishinaabe, king, Anishinaabe country, we always had family. We always had belonging in our ceremonies, in our everyday life. And today we kind of see the opposite. You go to the reservations and it seems kind of hopeless. You see homeless people, you see alcoholism, and you see all these bad things. But you see a lot of people that don't have that connection anymore. That connection to their land, to their community, to their language, to themselves. So our old way, that was a natural thing for us to have connection, to have belonging, to have a place to be and feel complete, I'll say. And Cece Myron, I spent a lot of years with Cece. She always says things, and I kind of think about them. But one day she told me our language, our culture, and our history, they're like that braid of sweetgrass. And you're not supposed to take that apart. You're not supposed to put your culture over here and your language over here, and somewhere over there you put your history. These things are supposed to be together. And when you teach these things, you're supposed to weave them together. And, I always thought about that. So when I teach, usually I try and weave these things together the best I can. But there's places in the world where they got really good at weaving these things together and keeping them together. And they usually call those immersion schools. But when language fades, so there's a pattern. So when people lose these things, they lose their language, their culture, their history, they lose a lot more. They lose pieces of themselves. And in communities, there's not that many communities left like this, but communities that have a 50% conversational fluency rate are higher. The suicide rates are 0. But communities that have lesser knowledge of their language have a 6 times higher suicide rate than those that do. So we see a correlation between our language and our mental health. And the less language we have, usually the poorer our mental health gets for us, for our communities. And we can kind of see that with alcoholism, drug addiction. I sing at a lot of fires and funerals sometimes. I forget what year that was, like 2018 maybe. I went saying anyway. And I sang quite a bit for like 3 weeks. And usually the families, they'll tell you stories about whoever it is that passed away. But in that 3 weeks, I sang for 4 young men who all committed suicide in our community. The youngest was 19, the oldest was 29. So this is real. This happens all the time in our communities, whether we pay attention to it or not. But this is a real thing. When we lose a language, we lose quite a bit of who we are. But when you bring a language back, usually the opposite happens. So you start bringing language back, you see improved mental health. You see alcoholism kind of start to get weaker. Drug addiction gets weaker, homelessness, all these problems we see in our community today, we start to see them fade a little bit. So there's a strength. When you go back and you find those footsteps that the ones before us walked, those ones that built those lodges, the ones who spoke our language, the ones who carried on these things. When you go back and you start going back to the places that they went and doing the things they did, you get better. Your community gets better. So a Wilmer Mankiller, I saw this quote a long time ago, like 10 years ago or something. It always stuck with me. Whoever controls our education of our children, they control our future. And I think that's 100% true. Some people think more critically, though. More like this is critical thinking, but what does that really mean? What this quote means? What if we have our own people teaching our people, but it's through a Western curriculum? Are we really controlling our education that way? I don't think so. So this is deeper than our own people teaching our own people. Because if our own people are in charge of these Western institutions that still teach Western education, that's not decolonizing, really. So, but community-rooted language efforts. So here's some things that I've been doing for maybe the past decade or so. So professional developments, I've done a couple of those for the local schools. Do camps for language and culture. I don't do too much language tables anymore, but at one time I did quite a few. I was on kind of a roll there for a couple of years. We did some radio lessons. Me and my elder, she adopted me as her son, so that's my mother now. Nimama. Corrine Hool, her name is. She's a first language speaker from Ebb and Flow. And she worked here with us for a while with our language. So we did some radio lessons. You might hear them on Kia. Language classes. Sometimes I teach at the college here, some classes. Working with first language speakers and public presentations like this one. So I try and keep busy with the language. Ngikuno Mage, so I teach these different areas. I have this belief that, well, there's some things that happened quite a while ago. I won't say what they were, kind of stir the pot too much. But I noticed that our language and our culture was kind of on the back burner all the time. And it's not really a big issue for most people. It gets treated kind of poorly, like it's just kind of over here. And when we need it, we'll go pretend we care about it. But when we're done with it, we'll kind of push it back in its corner and kind of forget about it. So whenever you don't see a language or a culture, or you don't hear it, or you're not exposed to it frequently, the value of that kind of goes down. But when you see something a lot, maybe every day, it starts to grow on you. So it starts to regain its value to yourself and your community. So if we hide our language and culture away too much, we kind of forget what it's worth. And there's people like I could be lying right now. Like I could just be saying this stuff to say it and sound good. You don't know if I really do this stuff. Well, there's pictures, I guess you know. But sometimes we say things and we talk about how important these things are. But we really don't know. And if you don't have urgency, whenever somebody says we're losing our language, then you probably don't understand what that means, really. You might be able to articulate it in words and sound good, but you probably don't know what that really means. So this spring, there were fires all over Turtle Mountain. And everybody is rushing around and trying to figure out what they're going to do. And they called it the National Guard, and we had firefighters from all over the country coming here to help us. We thought our homes were going to be lost. But the house that has our language, culture, and history in it has been burning down for over 100 years now. And not one time did we ever call for help to come save our language, our culture, and history. Not one time have I ever seen like a drastic measure taken in our community to save these things. So when you don't see things, you kind of forget about it, But when it's there constantly, you kind of remember the value of it. Kind of like our homes, right? We don't want our homes burning down. So it becomes more real to us. So there's a reason for these things. Here's some videos. I don't know if you guys could see them. We'll play that one. We'll play that one, Keenan. My right, your left. But here's some videos. So we play lacrosse. I don't know if you guys can see that, but we go on medicine walks. What else is happening? We build wigwams, build lodges. Teepees or wigwams. If I can't get a teepee, I'll usually build a wigwam. Or vice versa. If there's a teepee there, I'll use it. So we go out into the bush anyway. So again, learning about your culture and your language from a book or from a video. So those things are good tools But knowing about those things in theory are not the same as knowing about them from experience. And sometimes we know about these things in theory. We talk about them and we want to decolonize and do all these things, but maybe we've never even done any of this before. So it's a different perspective on what you're doing. We'll play the second video. So here we're playing hand games. We play different games. We try and introduce them to ceremonies. Sometimes if there's a Sundance going on, maybe we'll go there. Somebody's doing something where they could get exposure. So land-based teachings, they call this. So we go out into the bush. And depending on the time of year, we do different activities. Try and get them re-engaged with these things that were kind of taken from us. There's a wiggy-wom, some hand games. We did like some bear stuff. Introduce them to some lodges. So when I do camps, I try and make it hands-on, but also I try and include the language. So usually in the morning we do language, kind of like here we played all these games. So I got different games we play for language, the language part of our camps. Working with first language speakers. So here's some first language speakers I work with throughout the years. There's more, but I didn't have pictures of all of them. But whenever you go places like Hawaii, everybody talks about Hawaii. Their speakers drive their curriculum. Their speakers drive how they speak, how they teach, what they teach, who's going to teach where. So the value of first language speakers is critical. Because if you don't have first language speakers to filter your curriculum through, your curriculum might fall short of the ultimate goal. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but anyway, I work with these. So here's a policy. So in Hawaii, there's a school. There's a lot of schools in Hawaii, but some of them are immersion. But they make policies. And one of these schools made a policy for language and culture. Really strong policy. But the follow-through was really feeble. It was weak. And the community kind of noticed that. So the community took them to court. And they won. And they made that school enforce its policy. But I got different case studies that I reference here. But whenever you make a policy that supports language and culture, that doesn't mean you're supporting language and culture. If you don't have the people who could support that policy in your organization, then you're going to fall short of what that policy is intended for. And they found this out in Hawaii, kind of, through this court case. But revitalization thrives when you got the elders and the first language speakers, the knowledge carriers, driving your curriculum, driving all these things. So it's really critical. So in Hawaii, there's kind of a trend with these case studies where the stronger the incorporation of speakers is, the stronger the curriculum and revitalization efforts are. But the less you include your speakers, then usually the less effective your revitalization efforts are. So without the speakers, these language programs in Hawaii, they kind of notice that they go from teaching through language and culture to teaching about language and culture. So you might learn about your history, you might learn about your language, but learning through these things is a completely different thing. That's usually like an immersion school where you learn through your language, you learn through your culture. You don't just learn about it from a curriculum. So the value of your speakers is, if you really want to revitalize the language, you can't do it without them. You can't exclude them. You can't replace them. They have to be there. They kind of found this out in Hawaii. But here's some pictures of some of the first language speakers I work with. There's quite a few of them, probably a dozen or more. But also Dr. Luki works with them too for his math. This is one of the math workshops we did. We did a couple of them, I think 2 or 3. But anyway, the elders that we have come here, the first language speakers, they drive what we do. So whatever they tell us, however they say, okay, this is how we say that, and then that's how we say that. And they say, well, you put the words in this order, then we put the words in that order. See, it's not really that complex. But there was an elder here. His name was Alan Crow. He was from Whitefish Bay, and he said something. He said, they have to learn to speak like us, because a lot of times we start trying to make the speakers change how they speak to fit what we want. And that don't work too well. So you got to let the speakers speak how they speak. Kind of learn that way. Social media efforts. So I did these professional developments, and during these professional developments, there were some things that came up. So I try and listen the best I can. So we had the teachers from all our schools in our community were invited. I don't think they all showed up though, but teachers from the Dunsea School showed up. Teachers from the Balkworth School showed up, and I think the rest of them didn't show up. But we noticed something. There's a pattern. Now, they're trying to change this, so it might have changed. But at that time, say you're in a kindergarten or first grade, you would learn isolated words on word list, and maybe an introduction. That was kind of the norm. Makwa, Animush, Boosh. In kindergarten, then you're in fifth grade and you're learning Makwa, Animush, Boosh again. Then you're graduating high school and you're learning Makwa, Animush, Boosh. So it was repetitive. For 13 years, they just learned the same word list pretty much. And they kind of copied the same curriculum. Like, okay, this week we'll do the 7 teachings. This week we'll do days of the week. This week we'll talk about the moons. But it was isolated. That's not very good for learning a language when you isolate words. Because languages are patterns. They're full of patterns. And your brain is a master at learning patterns, not learning things in isolation. So you kind of go against the natural way you learn things when you isolate words on a word list and try and teach that way. So again, your brain now, it's literally a learning machine. I know we don't think like that, but that's what it does. It just learns things all the time. And it's usually things in a pattern. So like tying your shoe. If I have a kindergartner tie their shoe up here, it might take like 10 minutes. They might give up and just run off, But you get a fifth grader now, they're tying their shoe pretty good. And they're, I could probably tie my shoe pretty good, I hope. But there's a pattern there. And so language, you got patterns. And when you're exposed to those patterns over and over again for a long period of time, your brain starts to adjust to those different patterns. That's kind of how we acquire a language in a nutshell. But anyway, that's kind of what that thought, that idea, that information is what kind of motivated me to start creating things and sharing them with everybody. So I try and share posters kind of like this one, where instead of isolating words, now they're in a pattern. They're in a natural pattern. So I make posters, worksheets, things of that nature. And I try and scaffold beyond a word list. So maybe there's a word list there, but eventually we're going to scaffold up, and there's Makwa. Well, what about Makwa? Makwa Niba, the bear is sleeping. Makwa Kichiwisani, the bear is eating lots. Niwapama Makwa, I see a bear. Makwa ni Nuntawa, I hear a bear. So there's these patterns that occur in language. And we want to expose people to those patterns. Because if you don't have exposure to them, the chances of you learning them are pretty low. But also, I make videos, and I made like cartoons before. I try different things. But I'm trying to create things for a more complete learning environment, I'll say. So I know I can't like make people do what I want them to do, or I could have information and share it, but I can't really make people, listen to me or nothing like that. But I can make things that give them an option to include in what they're doing in their classroom or in their house, in their everyday life. And so I started sharing things, I don't know, 2022 maybe. today I get like between 1.5 and 2.5 million views on my stuff a month. I get I forget how much I got, like 34,000 followers, but they're looking for the language. And so I do work with when I do work with first language speakers, I want to make sure they're on the. So there's me and Corrine. I don't know if you guys could see that. So we did those radio lessons, and I made them videos on YouTube. Some of them. So there's on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok. So I try and share the language in different areas, different spaces. Our language should take up space every day. It should be everywhere we go. Our language, our culture, our history. It should be real to us. We should feel it. We should see it. We should know it's there. So there's a reason for these things. So visibility is survival and healing. So we got to reclaim our space that colonization took from us. So all those years of lateral violence, lateral colonialism, all those years of oppression from being forced to forget our language, our culture, our history, we had to hide those things for a long time. And through that process, we lost a lot of knowledge, but we still survived with a lot of knowledge. So it's important that we take up a space, whether it's this space or a different space, that our language has a space, our culture has a space, and it keeps that space, and people know that we're going to be here. No matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter how they feel about it, I'm never going to stop being Anishinaabe, and they need to be comfortable with that. And sometimes that's hard for people. So that lateral oppression is still there. So my conclusion. So language is survival. So Aanikobijigan, you got to know your ancestors, what they went through, but you also got to remember the future. So hopefully this work I do kind of influences some change where we maybe take these things more serious. Now I wanted to include this picture in the middle. So I don't know if you guys can see it that good, but this is from an old treaty. Anishinaabe chiefs signed it. And when they would sign their treaties a long time ago, they'd write their clan on there. And that's how they represented themselves in a treaty. So these are their clans. And on their clans, their heart and their brains on there. And there's little lines connecting all their hearts to each other and all their minds to one another. So when they signed this treaty, their hearts and minds were one. They were together. When they were making decisions about Aanikobijigan, the next generation, their future generations. But they always thought about their ancestors. But they also thought about us all the time as well. That's what we needed to be like again. We need to go back to putting our hearts and minds together. Try and make a better future for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. So, that's my presentation. If you guys got any questions?